The year was 1879, and the last train west wheezed out of Omaha with a cry that split the frost-hardened silence. Esther Hale sat among crates and canvas sacks, her gloved hands folded over a satchel that held everything she owned. 38 years behind her, worn like a corset too long-laced, and ahead only the weight of hope that had thinned to desperation. She sent 6 letters, all neatly written, the ink faint where her fingers trembled, each one addressed to a different name, a different man who'd advertised for a wife. She was honest, no use pretending youth when it had left her quietly after a second failed engagement and years tending her father's mercantile until consumption took him in a July heatwave. She described herself plainly, God-fearing, of firm constitution, able to cook, mend, and maintain a home. No children, 30. Sober of temperament. 3 replies came. The first mistook her age as a misprint. The second offered only one line, too old. The third, from a man called Elias Tritt, sounded almost kind. He asked for a daguerreotype. She sent it. Nothing returned. But she had no work left in Omaha, no family, no coin to rent past the end of winter. So she wrote one more time to Elias Tritt in Ash Thistle, Montana Territory. No photograph this time, only her words. She told him she was coming, that if he turned her away, she'd find her own way through. The train choked westward into the pale iron plains. Ash Thistle was a speck wrapped in wind. Snow stacked along the clapboard fronts of its buildings, and the church steeple leaned as though bowed under its own prayers. The town had once been a mining camp, then a ranching stopover. Now it was mostly a place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. Esther stepped down from the train with no one waiting. She stood in a bladed wind that carried the scent of smoke and horses, watching a boy in a rag coat load sacks onto a wagon. When she asked where she could find Elias Tritt, he stared. Tritt don't talk much to folk, lives up by Widow's Ridge. Could you take me there? He spat into the snow. Ain't my way. She walked. The ridge was 2 miles outside town, the trail a frozen scar between bramble and cottonwood. Her boots slipped, skirt catching on branches. The house came into view as dusk fell, a long-roofed homestead with a barn slumping beside it. A single candle flickered in the front window. Esther knocked twice. A man opened the door slow, as if surprised someone dared. He was taller than she expected, gray at the temples, hard around the eyes. His shirt was homespun, his boots mud-caked. He held the door without a word. "I'm Esther Hale," she said. "You wrote to me." He looked at her like a man might look at a dry well. "I changed my mind." She stared past him. Inside, the hearth was warm, the table set with a single tin plate. "I came from Omaha," she said. "I have nothing else." "You didn't send the photo." "I figured you'd seen enough. I don't take kindly to strangers deciding for me." She tightened her grip on the satchel. "Then don't call me a stranger. You told me you wanted a wife. I'm here. You don't have to marry me. Just let me stay until spring." He stepped back without nodding. She entered. The air smelled of ash and coffee. She moved past him into the narrow warmth. The fire cracked in the grate. A wooden rocking chair stood beside a woven rug worn to threadbare. "You can sleep in the loft," he said. "Barn's got room if that don't suit." "I'll take the loft." He didn't speak again that night. Esther climbed the ladder slow, each rung a soft groan of wood. The loft had an old mattress, 2 quilts, a tin basin. Wind cried against the eaves, and she lay in her coat, feeling the ache in her legs from the trail and the heavier ache beneath her ribs. In the morning, she woke before him, stoked the fire, boiled water. When he came down, she'd already swept the floor and folded his clean shirts. He grunted, "Don't mean we're wed." "I know." The weeks passed without ceremony. She worked split kindling, fed chickens, stitched saddlecloths. He never thanked her, but neither did he turn her away. They shared the table in silence. She learned his habits, the way he rinsed his cup twice, the way he checked the door latch twice before bed. He spoke little. Only once did he say something unguarded. "My wife's name was Clara," he said one night. "She died 4 winters ago. Fever took her fast." Esther looked into her coffee. "I'm sorry." He didn't respond. One morning she walked into town, bought salt and flour on credit. People stared. A woman behind the counter asked, "You Tritt's new housekeeper?" Esther met her eyes. "I keep my own name." Outside, two boys whispered, "She's too old for courting." One snorted. She turned and stared at them until they fell silent. By February, the snow softened. Calves were born, and Esther helped bind their legs when they slipped on the ice. One died in her arms. She buried it alone behind the barn. Elias watched her from the porch, his mouth a line. That night, he stood by the fire long after she'd gone to bed. She heard him say to no one, "She's not like Clara." She didn't know if that was praise or warning. One evening, a rider came, wore a badge under his coat, the sheriff, though he didn't wear it proud. "Trit," he said, "there's trouble out near the Split Rock Pass. Rustlers, they took a horse from old Rill's place. Might be they try yours next." Elias nodded. "I'll watch for it." Esther stood behind him. The sheriff's gaze flicked to her. "Your wife?" "No. She lived here a while." Elias didn't answer. "She said I came west alone. I'm not ashamed of it." He nodded once, surprised. "Most women wouldn't." "I'm not most women." When the sheriff rode off, Elias closed the door quiet. She turned from the window. "You never asked what I left behind." "I figured if you wanted to tell me, you would." She studied him. "I didn't lose anyone. I just grew too old for folks to look at me and see a woman worth asking." He looked up. "You think that's all I'd see?" "I don't know what you see." "I see someone who wakes before me and sleeps after. Someone who didn't flinch at burying a calf. Someone who hasn't once asked me for anything but fire and salt." "That's not love." "No, but it's not nothing." The silence held. She stepped closer to the hearth, the warmth licking at her skirt hem. "If I stayed," she said, "not as a house guest, would you marry me?" He didn't answer at first, just watched the fire move. Then he said, "I don't want to bury another wife." "Then don't," she said. "Bury yourself first if it comes to that, but I'm not going anywhere else." He met her gaze. It was the first time she saw what was behind his silence, fear shaped like grief, like guilt too long held. "Come spring," he said, "I'll take you to Reverend Mallow." She nodded once, climbed the ladder, slept with her boots beside the bed. And that night, the wind didn't sound so lonely. The thaw came late that year. Mud pulled at the wagon wheels and coyotes yipped closer to the fence line each night, sniffing at calves and what little remained of the cold-killed lambs. Esther watched the land wake up in fits and starts, first the chokecherry blossoms along the ridge, then the moss-green buds on cottonwoods, then the river cutting itself loose from ice. Elias didn't speak of the Reverend again, not at breakfast, not over the fence mending, not even when Esther cleaned out the front parlor with the steady hand of someone preparing for guests. She didn't press him. But in the back of her thoughts, the question held like a tooth waiting to break skin. She worked without being asked, scrubbed windows, salted pork, started a garden with what seeds she could trade for turnip, beet, bitter greens. By then the town had stopped whispering so much. Some still stared when she came in to buy nails or lamp oil, but the worst of the mockery had passed. Loneliness, she'd found, was more frightening to most than age. Then one morning, with the creek just swollen enough to carry trout, a boy came riding hard up the trail. He was barely 15, red-faced from galloping. "Mr. Tritt," he called out before even dismounting, "they found a body out past Raven Rock. Woman, been there a while." Elias came out wiping his hands on a rag. "Who?" The boy shrugged. "Sheriff said it's hard to tell. He's asking for folks to come help." Elias looked to Esther. She'd already untied her apron. "I'll ride with you," she said. The body lay near a wash where spring melt had uncovered what winter tried to keep hidden. A woman's dress, sun-bleached and torn, hair tangled in scrub brush, one boot missing. Her hands had been bound behind her back. They buried her in the old cemetery near the gulch, where wooden markers lined like drunk men and names faded fast in wind and rain. Sheriff Rook took statements, though no one knew the woman, just another lost girl on the edge of nowhere. That night, Elias didn't eat. He stood by the window with his arms crossed, the fire's reflection dancing on the glass like ghosts he didn't want to name. "She was about her age," he said. "Who's?" "Clara, my wife." Esther set her fork down. "You think she came west alone?" He didn't answer. She said, "You're wondering what I'd look like if that had been me." Still he said nothing, but she saw it in the hollow around his eyes. She rose and cleared the plates, her movements careful, measured. "You said you didn't want to bury another wife," she said. "But the world doesn't care what you want. You could bury me tomorrow. You could bury yourself. What matters is whether you let the fear choose for you." He watched her wash each tin dish, the water going gray. The next morning, he harnessed the wagon without a word and drove her into town. Reverend Mallow was a thin man with a blind left eye and a voice that cracked like old wood. He asked no questions, just said, "God brings the willing together, and the land tests the rest." They were married in the back of the church, in the shadow of stained glass whose colors had long since dulled with dust. No guests, no flowers, just the dry echo of a yes spoken without flourish. On the way back, rain fell, not heavy, just enough to turn the road slick. Esther let her hand rest on the bench between them. He didn't reach for it, but he didn't move away either. In the weeks that followed, nothing changed and everything did. They still rose early, worked long. But there was a new silence, less hollow, more like the hush of something taking root beneath the soil. Elias no longer double-checked the door. He no longer left the room when she sang old hymns while boiling coffee. He even carved her a new handle for her garden hoe, smoothed from pine, fitted to her grip. And then one afternoon, a rider came again. Not the sheriff this time, a man she hadn't seen before. He wore a long coat, stained from road dust, and rode a gelding with a bite-marked ear. He dismounted without greeting, looked past Elias straight to her. "You her?" he asked. Elias stepped forward. "You looking for someone?" "Esther Hale." Her stomach tightened. "I am." He nodded once. "I'm Walter Briggs, my brother on the land east of Vermilion Creek. Before he died, he kept a stack of letters from women answering ads. Yours was in there, dated back 6 years. I was cleaning his cabin, thought you should have it back." He handed her the envelope, the seal unbroken. She turned it over in her hand. "I sent that to a Henry Briggs," she said. "My brother. I never heard from him. He died before he ever opened it. Took a bad fall out by the cliffs. Might have been drink, might have been worse." She tucked the letter into her apron. "Thank you." Walter didn't linger. After he rode off, Elias watched her long. "You were willing to marry a man you didn't know," he said. "So were you." He shook his head. "No, I wanted a house kept, food cooked, silence shared. You wanted more than that. I wanted a place where I wasn't invisible." He looked at her then, truly looked, as if only now realizing she wasn't a ghost stitched together by need and patience. "You're not invisible." She didn't smile, just nodded once and went back inside. Summer turned dry, the grass yellowed early. Fires broke out east of the ridge and ash rained down like dark snow for a week. They kept buckets ready, slept light. The wind carried the scent of burning timber, of things lost too fast. In August, Esther woke to find Elias gone, his rifle missing from its peg. She waited till dusk, then saddled her own horse and rode after him. Found him by the old Cooper trail, kneeling beside a dead mare. Blood pooled in the dirt, a rope halter hung from its neck, no saddle, no packs. Elias stood when she approached. "Rustlers again," he said. "Must have driven it too hard, took what they could, left the rest." She glanced at the tracks, too many to follow. "What now?" He looked out past the trees, where the sun was going red behind the hills. "We tighten things, lock the barn, keep the dogs close." Esther nodded. On the ride back, he said, "You still think you made the right choice?" She answered without hesitation, "Yes." "You didn't even flinch when you saw the blood." "I've bled enough not to." That night they slept in the same room for the first time, not out of desire, but caution. 2 rifles leaned against the wall, the dogs curled near the hearth. And when sleep came, it came to both of them without the usual ghosts. Weeks later, the sheriff brought news. The rustlers had been run off, 2 killed, 1 jailed. He tipped his hat to Esther as he left. "You were right about her," he told Elias. After he was gone, Elias turned to her. What did he mean? She smiled faintly. I told him once that I wasn't most women. Elias looked at her like a man seeing the slow unfurling of a stormflower. Rare, weather-worn, stubborn in bloom. He said, "You're not." And that night he took her hand. Not in hunger, not in pity, but in peace. By the second autumn of their marriage, the land had grown to accept Esther Hale. The chickens no longer scattered when she approached. The mare, once skittish, now let her braid its mane without tether. Even the sour-faced widow who ran the millhouse began to nod at her in passing. But peace in a place like Ash Thistle was never permanent. It came in breathless spells, like the calm between a cough and the blood it brings up. That October a stranger took up at the saloon. Young, well-dressed by frontier standards, his coat clean, boots polished, eyes too sharp for a man with no visible trade. His name was Harlan Sykes, though nobody was sure he'd been born with it. He made fast friends with gamblers, sat quiet in the corner watching every soul pass through. Esther met him only once, during a trip into town for kerosene and molasses. He tipped his hat, smiled. "You're the woman who married Elias Tret," he said. She gave him a measured look. "And you are someone who appreciates a good story." "That's so. I've heard a dozen about you. The old maid who braved the West. The bride no man wanted until one did. The woman who walked up Widow's Ridge and never came down." She let his words fall flat. "You believe everything you hear." He chuckled. "I believe in motives." "What's mine, then?" "To outlive them all." She walked away without answering, but the weight of his gaze lingered. At home, Elias had taken to repairing the old smokehouse. Winter promised to be harder than most. The wind came early and bitter, and already the chickens laid fewer eggs. Esther salted more meat, sewed more flannel, watched the firewood dwindle. One night she came down with fever, not violent but slow and aching. She fought it with vinegar cloths and rest, refusing to let it take hold. Elias sat beside the bed and read from an old family Bible, his voice low, words worn soft from repetition. "Did Clara get sick?" she asked, half lost in fever fog. He nodded. "I sat just like this. She wouldn't look at me, even when the pain got bad. I think she was ashamed." "I'm not. I know." She recovered by week's end. When she rose from bed, weak but upright, he kissed her forehead without comment. The next day he rode into town to trade pelts. Returned with a cold expression and a splintered knuckle. "Ran into that Sykes fellow," he said. "Asked too many questions." Esther set the kettle on the stove. "About what?" "You." She turned slowly. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, but he knew your name before I gave it." They said nothing more that night. But from that evening on, Elias cleaned his rifle twice instead of once. A week later a letter came, no return address, postmarked from Cheyenne. It had her name in a man's handwriting, blockish and practiced. She opened it on the porch. Elias watched from the door. Inside, 6 words. "I know what you left behind." No signature. She burned the letter. Elias didn't ask, but she saw the tightness in his shoulders the next morning. The way he paused longer at the window, eyes on the trail. Later, while hauling water, he said, "Whatever it is, it's yours to tell or keep." She stopped him with a look. "When I was 20, I worked for a man in Missouri," she said. "Owned a dry goods store. His wife had died. He was twice my age, kind enough at first." Elias waited. "I lived above the store, took care of the books. After 2 months he asked to court me. I said no. He locked the door the next night, said if I wasn't his, I was anybody's. I fought, I ran." "You killed him." "No, I left him breathing, but I didn't wait to see if he stayed that way. I changed my name, fled east then west. I don't know what story he told afterward or who believed it, but I never stopped running." Elias didn't move, didn't flinch. "Do you regret coming here?" She answered only that it took so long. That night they spoke no vows, but a deeper thing settled between them. Not love, not trust, but that third thing people rarely name, recognition. 2 days later, the barn burned. Esther woke to the sound of splintering beams, fire catching in the dry roof straw. She and Elias ran barefoot into the night. The sky glowed orange, the horses shrieking in their stalls. He freed them with his bare hands, burning his palms on the latches. She found the lantern glass near the barn wall, smashed, oil scent strong in the dirt. "Set fire," she said. He nodded once. Sykes had disappeared by morning. The sheriff took statements, promised to poke around. No justice came. They rebuilt the barn in silence. Winter bit harder than expected. One of the mares miscarried. The garden stores ran low. Snow drifted in from the east, packing hard against the house until the windows groaned. In the quiet, Esther wrote a letter, not to Sykes, not to the man in Missouri, to no one. She burned that one, too. When spring came, she planted peas and onion bulbs. Elias limped from an old injury flaring in the cold, so she took to the heavier work. He sat on the porch, carving spoons with his bandaged hand, watching her. "You think he'll come back?" he asked. "He might. You afraid?" "No, but I'm ready." He nodded. They didn't speak of it again. But the rifle stayed loaded, the door stayed locked, and Esther Hale, bride once rejected, now stood at the center of a life that was built not from romance, but from ruin made livable. By the 3rd year, the valley had learned to respect Esther Hale. In the spring, a colt was born with a twisted leg. Elias thought to put it down, but Esther rigged a brace from leather and cane, adjusted it each week. The colt grew straight, fast, grew into a stallion that could cut across hills like wind on water. Neighbors came to ask advice, on crops, on foaling, on keeping a house with less and less. Esther offered answers, never stories. She kept her history sealed, but her presence grew roots deeper than any man's memory of her age. Still, something shifted that summer. It began with the schoolhouse fire. Not a blaze, not like the barn, but enough smoke, enough heat to blacken a corner, to scare the children, to bring the sheriff riding fast and grim. They lit a rag through the window, he told Elias. Found the bottle still hot. "Anyone see who?" A shadow, man with a limp. Esther turned from the porch. Her voice was quiet. "Not a limp, a drag." Elias stared at her. "You think it's Sykes?" "He's not done." The sheriff looked between them. "You want me to send word east, bring someone in?" She shook her head. "No one's coming for us, that's the point." They fortified the house, reinforced the windows, dug a root cellar deeper than needed, moved the bed to the back wall and kept the dogs inside after sundown. Esther began to sleep in her boots. For weeks, nothing happened. Then came the sound of wood snapping just past midnight. A henhouse door wrenched off its hinges. Feathers scattered like snow, 3 chickens gone. Elias went out at dawn, found tracks, large boots, measured stride, deliberate. "He's watching," Esther said. "We can wait him out." She looked at the horizon, eyes narrowed. "No, we end it." She rode into town that day, left Elias behind, took the stallion with the mended leg, fast as fire, cutting wind as she rode hard for the saloon. Sykes was there. Back to the wall, whiskey in hand, talking to no one. Esther walked straight to his table. "You should leave," she said. He smiled. "You have a way of turning up just when I start thinking about you." "I'm not a thought, I'm a warning." Pretty strong words for a woman who hides behind a widower. She didn't flinch. "You know why I ran, you know what I left." He leaned forward. "And I know what you did." She met his eyes. "Then you know what I'm still capable of." The saloon went quiet. Sykes laughed, but it was hollow. "You think being brave makes you safe. I think knowing fear and walking anyway makes me more dangerous than you understand." He stood slow, tossed coins on the table. "You got grit, I'll grant you that, but grit, what gets ground down." She watched him walk out. Didn't follow. Didn't need to. That night she told Elias to rest. I'll take first watch, she said. He didn't argue. At midnight she heard the latch shift, not loud, but careful, like a breath being held too long. She moved to the side of the door, rifle in hand, heart steady. The door creaked open. A shadow entered, one boot dragging. She didn't speak, didn't warn. She pulled the trigger. The blast lit the room. The shadow fell. Elias bolted upright from the back room, dogs barking, smoke drifting from the muzzle. When he reached the body, Esther was already kneeling beside it. It was Sykes. It was the boy from the mill house, 15 maybe, red-cheeked, still breathing. In his hands, a sack of salt pork. Esther stared. Elias swore low. The boy coughed. He paid me, said no one would get hurt, said it was just to scare you. Who? Elias asked. But they already knew. They rode out at first light. Found Sykes 2 valleys over, camped in a pine hollow, cooking over a low fire. He didn't reach for a weapon when they appeared. He just looked up. You brought her. Elias raised the rifle. You made that boy steal for you. I made him survive, Sykes said, same way she did. Esther dismounted, walked past the barrel of Elias' rifle. Sykes watched her. You want to kill me, he said. Go ahead, you wouldn't be the first. No, she said, but I'll be the last. She took his knife from his belt before he could move, slit the rope to his satchel, emptied it, letters, old, stolen, women's names, faces, promises never answered. You're a vulture, she said. I'm what men like you made, he said, looking past her to Elias. What you left behind when you picked someone else. She drove the heel of her boot into his hand. Hard, bones cracked. He screamed once. That's for the barn, she said. The schoolhouse, the boy. You done, he spat. No, she said, I'm done being afraid. They left him there, not dead, just broken enough he wouldn't ride far. They told the sheriff. Justice came late and quiet. Not in court, not in blood, but in the absence that followed. By fall the house stood whole again, new hens in the coop, the cellar stocked. Esther sat on the porch with her mended rifle across her lap, watching the trees shiver under first frost. Elias brought her coffee. He said, You sleep now. She nodded. I dream, she added. Of what? Not the past. He sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Then he said, I think you've scared the rest of them off. She zipped. Let them come, she said. And in her voice was something steelier than threat. A promise. The fourth winter came like a quiet blade, clean and unannounced. No thunder of storms, no great shattering of branches, just a silence that thickened day by day, pressing into the corners of their home and into the folds of time between words. By then, the house had held long enough that it felt like theirs, not his, not borrowed, not braced by necessity. But something built and stayed in, one cold season at a time. Esther felt the years, not in her bones, which still rose each dawn without protest, but in the way her reflection changed in the frosted windows, sharper, leaner, less a survivor, and more a shape the land itself had carved. She no longer flinched at noises in the dark. She no longer measured herself by the stories other women told. By then, Elias had come to understand her rhythms, the way she stirred coffee counterclockwise, the way she closed doors with the heel of her hand, the way her voice dipped when speaking to animals and flattened when speaking truth. He'd grown quieter with time. He still moved with purpose, but it was no longer the stiffness of grief. It was something steadier, the gait of a man whose ghosts had stopped leading him. In January, he caught fever. It came on quick, shallow breath, heat rising off his skin like smoke. Esther boiled herbs, pressed cloths, read from the same pages he once read to her, though her voice broke more than his had. For 5 days he drifted in and out. On the 6th he opened his eyes and said her name. Esther. She leaned close. If I die. You won't. Bury me out by the pasture fence, where the soil stays soft. She shook her head. "You're not dying." But she memorized his words. And on the 8th day, he woke hungry. She made broth and didn't cry until he slept again. By early March, he was back to splitting wood, though slower. She worked beside him. They didn't speak of what nearly happened, not because they feared it, but because they didn't need to name what they'd already endured. The days stretched long again. Snow melted into the fields. Crocuses clawed up from under ice. In town, they said she'd bewitched him, that no man ever softened without spellwork, that a woman like her must have hidden knives under her skirts to carve out a life like this. She didn't argue. She never had. One Sunday, as the valley greened, they hosted a meal. Not a celebration, just soup and bread and something close to fellowship. Two neighbors, the millhouse boy, older now, a widow with a child no one claimed. They sat at the long table under the porch beam, eating in silence broken only by spoons and wind. Esther watched them. She saw what she'd become, not a wife in the traditional shape of it, not a matron, not a frontier saint, but something else. A fixed point, a known quantity in a world always threatening to unravel. When the guests left, Elias lingered at the door. "She asked me if we had children," he said. Esther looked up. "What did you tell her?" "That the land is full of them, lost ones someone left behind." She nodded and said maybe someday one finds us. It was near the end of that year when a letter came, carried by a wiry man with ink on his fingers. He said it had waited 2 years in Cheyenne before being forwarded. It was from a woman, wrote in tight, desperate hand. "You don't know me, but I heard of you. They say you survived what I couldn't. If you have a place, if you have a corner of a room, I'll come." No name, just a return address scrawled in smudged graphite. Esther sat with the letter. Elias didn't ask what it said. She folded it carefully. "Someone needs something we still have," she said. He nodded. "Then we'll make room." They cleared the loft again, set a basin out, a second quilt. And when the coach arrived 3 weeks later, a girl stepped down, no older than 20, hands shaking, face raw from weeping or wind. Her boots were too small. Her voice had gone. Esther didn't ask what she ran from. She took her inside, showed her the ladder, the basin, the quilt. Later, when the girl came down for tea, Elias set a bowl in front of her. The girl looked at both of them with a kind of stunned relief. "Are you family?" she asked. Esther met Elias' eyes. "Yes," she said. And it was true. Years passed that way. Girls came and went, some stayed, some healed enough to ride further west, some left with letters pressed into their palms, warnings and maps and names to avoid. People in town stopped asking. They called it the house on Widow's Ridge, said it kept women, said it turned them hard. But the truth was softer. It gave them space. To grieve, to wake, to grow something out of ruin. One spring, Elias didn't wake. No fever, no sickness, just silence and a stillness in the bed that told Esther what she already knew. She didn't weep, not then. She sat beside him, took his hand, let the day rise. Later, she buried him by the pasture fence, where the soil stayed soft. She planted white flowers along the edge. The stallion paced the fence line for hours after. Esther aged slow, with purpose. Her hair silvered, her voice deepened, her hands grew stiffer. But she never stopped walking the ridge each morning. Never stopped answering letters that came without warning from women whose voices had been stolen. She became something of a myth. Not for her love story, but for what she refused to lose. And what she refused to let others lose, too. When she died, she was buried beside Elias. Not under a headstone, but beneath a post carved with the single word. Worth. The last girl she'd taken in placed it there. Because no one else ever had. And because, even in death, Esther Hale was still watching the ridge. Still standing guard. Still reminding the world it was never too late to choose yourself. and never too late to be chosen.